last 1 year, I would say, because of the initial lockdown imposed, one must go by the sequence of events. Initially, on August 5th, 2019, when the state of Jammu and Kashmir was reorganized and Article 370 and 35A were nullified, the government imposed a communication blockade in Jammu and Kashmir. So there was no phone, there was no internet, and there was no communication really. But within a month or two after things were settling down, and people were trying to come out from their homes, and this was a self-imposed lockdown for their own mobility, because the government did not impose any lockdown on mobility of people as long as they did not gather in groups. But they imposed a self lockdown in Kashmir because there was a threat by Jaish-e-Mohammed, by Hizbul Mujahideen, by Lashkar-e-Taiba, the three banned terror outfits, and there were some killings by these terror groups of civilians who defied the militant diktats, who defied the militant imposed lockdown in Kashmir. So they were killed, and these are Kashmiri Muslims who were killed by these terror groups. So after that, 6 months went in the lockdown imposed by terror groups. And now we have seen, after coronavirus pandemic, which originated in Wuhan, which is a province in China, and it spread to the entire world, and of course to Kashmir as well. So we have had 6 months of restrictions plus lockdown plus extended lockdown. So this whole year has also been wasted in many ways, not just in Kashmir but the rest of India also. So we did not see the kind of development, the kind of economic activity one would have wished to and one was hoping for. We did not see the same kind of activity in Kashmir. But despite the lockdown, despite the coronavirus pandemic, I think things did move forward. I know for sure that government did, despite the fact there's not a popular government in Jammu and Kashmir right now. It's the Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha right now, and earlier we have LG Murmu. So even despite the fact that there is no popular government, but the government did make progress in various developmental projects, both in Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, which is now a separate union territory. I visited Ladakh a couple of months ago because we have a standoff with China along the line of actual control in Ladakh. And I could see that, the government was putting its best efforts despite the pandemic. I saw offices were open even at midnight, the government offices. And I saw that, files were being cleared because Ladakh is starting from scratch. It is, because Ladakh was the most backward region of the erstwhile state. There is a lot of activity happening in Ladakh. And at the same time, I know for sure in various backward parts of Jammu region and Kashmir Valley, a lot of work is happening. Of course, we will see the progress once the projects are completed. But I can say with certainty and also with hope that more work will happen once this fear of coronavirus pandemic is over. Well, there is no way Article 370 or 35A will be restored, because simply for the reason that it's the Parliament of India that approved the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir state and nullification of 370 and 35A. So it was democratic in that sense. And it's also a fact that Farooq Abdullah, who himself is a member of parliament and has not resigned from parliament, even though he thinks that 370 should be restored, and even though he's threatening that China should come over and help Kashmiri separatists, including this entire Gupkar brigade, which has come together, a conglomerate of 7 parties. But the fact remains, none of the parliamentarians who were elected from Kashmir Valley did not resign from parliament. If they had so much trouble with the parliament, with the unanimous voice that came from India for nullification of 370, he should have resigned, but they did not. The other point is that it is now almost a done thing, because after the nullification of 370, 2 things happened. One was the domicile rights for jobs and education. So any Jammu and Kashmir citizen, any Jammu and Kashmir state subject who whose ancestors were born there and who've been there for 15 years or several other criteria, they are eligible for that domicile right as far as employment is concerned, government employment is concerned. Now a lot of people who served in Jammu and Kashmir for 15 years, but their ancestors were not born there, even they are eligible for applying for jobs under the domicile right. That is one. Number 2 that the Home Ministry did was land rights were opened for every citizen of India, and I think that is a massive development that happened in the last 1 year. What does that do? Essentially, any citizen of India can now go and buy land, do business in Jammu and Kashmir, settle down there. The only thing is that the government has put restrictions on agricultural land in J&K. Agriculturists cannot sell their land to outsiders. They can sell it only to the government and to the agriculturists. So from that perspective also, 370 or no 370, 35A or no 35A, the truth today is that equality, which is enshrined in Indian Constitution, has been extended to Jammu and Kashmir and has been extended to the people of India when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir. Until last year, Indian people could not go and do anything in J&K, even if they lived there for 50 years. But if they were not state subjects, they did not have any rights. I was disqualified as a state subject because I had chosen to marry a non-state subject. So that was the kind of law, that was the regressive law that was applicable in Jammu and Kashmir. Even though the fact is that Jammu and Kashmir High Court, after decades of legal battle, did try to reduce the regressive element of this law in 2002, when it said that no, women cannot be disqualified even if they are married to non-state subjects. They deserve to have the same rights as men. But the court had stopped at that point. The children of women who had married outside the state, with non-state subjects, they could not inherit their mother's property. They could not inherit their grandparents' property. They were disqualified. So this, nullification of 35A and 370 changed that. And now with this new notification on domicile rights in employment and domicile, not just domicile, but opening up of land of Jammu and Kashmir to everybody, including Kashmiri Pandits, is, I think, a momentous, a historic decision which has ensured equality of not just gender, but equality of every Indian citizen in Jammu and Kashmir. the last 6 years since Modi came to power, a lot happened in terms of outreach. A lot happened in terms of building bridges and making peace with Pakistan, making peace with all kinds of people in Kashmir as well. A lot of intra and interstate dialogue did happen through back channels, and some of it even through open channels. But we know that Pakistan did not respond to that outreach with peace overtures. It responded to India's initiatives with terror attacks, from Pathankot to and terror attacks in Jammu and Kashmir. India was told in very clear terms that cross-border terror will continue until Jammu and Kashmir is liberated from India. And I think finally, the last nail in the coffin was Pulwama terror attack, in which 40 CRPF soldiers were killed. And before that, we also know that Kashmir's very famous, well-known journalist Shujaat Bukhari was assassinated in Srinagar. So several terror attacks and several rejections of dealing with the problem. We know that Pakistan did not clamp down on terror groups in Pakistan. We know that infiltration did not stop. We know that Masood Azhar, Hafiz Saeed, Saeed Salahuddin, they were not penalized and they were not booked in Pakistan. So finally, Pulwama terror attack, I think that was the line when Prime Minister Modi decided that enough is enough, we need to retaliate. And we did see that Pulwama was finally retaliated with an airstrike in Balakot, and that was quite an unprecedented move. So from that, several other steps were taken. One was banning of Jamaat-e-Islami. And now what is Jamaat-e-Islami? Jamaat-e-Islami is the political wing of Hizbul Mujahideen terror group. Jamaat-e-Islami's influence is in large pockets of South Kashmir. Then JKLF, Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, which was one of the pioneer terror groups in Kashmir, which in fact initiated the insurgency against the Indian state in 87, 89, was also banned. Then NIA raids against people who were involved in terror funding in Kashmir. That also happened. So with these initiatives, and of course then the government of India put its foot down on issues that were basically a bone of contention between the PDP government and the BJP government, which had an alliance in Kashmir, including 370 and 35A. So I think the central government under Prime Minister Modi did shift the policy on Kashmir quite dramatically, which is very different from the policies his predecessors implemented in the last 30 years. If you really want to understand Pakistan's tactics and strategy, you don't have to really go far. Just look the way Pakistan in the last 30 years has projected India as an oppressor of human rights, not only in media in Pakistan, but media in India. The mainstream media in India projected as an oppressor of human rights in Kashmir Valley, of Kashmiri, not just Kashmiri Muslims, but also an oppressor of Muslims in other parts of the country. So that is what Pakistan's expertise is. This This is what Pakistan Army, Pakistan, which is an Islamic republic, not a secular republic. Pakistan is also a military, quasi-military state because everything is controlled by the army. So a military Islamic state gets to dictate the narrative not only in Pakistan against India, but also dictate the same narrative in India. Not just in the rest of India, but Kashmir. Pakistan's cross-border terrorism has been a non-issue in the last 30 years. If you ask the academia and if you ask the human rights lobbies in India, and if you ask the celebrity journalists in India, it's always been human rights abuse committed by India, not the Pakistan cross-border terrorism, which ethnically cleansed entire indigenous minority of Kashmir, that is Kashmiri Pandits, the community that I come from, but also the fact that Kashmiri Muslims were also killed in the last 30 years. Any Kashmiri Muslim who did not agree with Pakistan, who did not agree with freedom from India, he was killed, he was tortured, he was ostracized, he was punished and persecuted in Kashmir. So that is one. Pakistan has also been, I would say, oppressive and tyrannical against its own people, which is Muslims essentially in Pakistan. Whether you look at Ahmadiyyas and Shias, all other sectarian groups within the larger Muslim fold, within the larger Islamic fold, they have been persecuted. If you look at Gilgit-Baltistan, where the majority is Shia Muslims, they've been persecuted like anything. And this is not my assessment. This is what Pakistan's own Human Rights Commission is saying. They have documented the kind of crimes and human rights abuse that has been committed by Pakistani army against its own minorities in Gilgit-Baltistan, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So, you ask Indian mainstream media, they would have no clue about it, and they have never bothered to highlight it. On the other hand, you ask anybody in Pakistan about Kashmir, they will be able to tell you the lies and propaganda that Pakistan has fed them in the last 30 years. I think it's a huge development, not only for Kashmiri Pandits, but overall common Kashmiri who are living in Kashmir. Because you see, this Roshni scam was essentially a scam that and continued by another state government, between muftis and Abdullahs and anyone who came in between. They ensured that land was given to their own cronies. Land was grabbed by their own friends and relations, and this was Kashmir's land. This was supposedly, Kashmir is supposedly the only place in India which has had land reforms, but it's not really land reforms that happened in Kashmir when Sheikh Abdullah took over in 1947. It's been grabbing of land, taking away land from their owners. And for example, after Sheikh Abdullah took over, he took land of Kashmir, not Kashmiri Pandits, but several other, several Kashmiri Muslim landowners also, and then distributed it among his own cronies and, friends, and created a new land owning elite in Kashmir. Now, with Roshni scam, they did the same thing. A lot of land which was with the government, some of it was not with the government, but they distributed it among their friends and cronies. So this, I think, is a huge development, because a lot of land will be vacated, and this land can be used for rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits who were driven out, whose houses were destroyed, whose temples were destroyed in Kashmir. And then, for example, my family, our entire neighborhood was razed down in 1990. So we don't have a place to go back to. There are thousands of Kashmiri Pandits who don't have any homes, even though they may have some land, but we cannot go back because we don't have anything, any place to go to. So I think this is a good development. Conducive atmosphere building will take time, and it takes time. We were driven out of our homes in very specific circumstances. The state machinery had completely collapsed in 89-90. We were targeted, our intellectuals of the community were targeted, selectively killed and assassinated in broad daylight. My family was threatened. We were asked to leave by Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, which is now a banned terror group. So for us to return, I think it is very important that there are enough incentives for us to go back. One, as I said, this new land amendment that the central government brought, by which land is now open to any citizen of India. I think that is going to open it up for businesses, for investment, for corporations, for generating new employment and jobs, which will create an opportunity for Kashmiri Pandit youth to look at that option. But if there was no such option, obviously there would be no incentive to go back to. The older generation, I think, is willing to go back to, provided they have safety and they have security in townships. They want exclusive townships with enough security. But more than that, I think it's the younger generation of Kashmiri Pandits who can look at the option of return only when employment incentives, when businesses, when investment happens in J&K. Our parents, my parents' generation, most of them are in Jammu right now. They might as well go to Kashmir in summers, when it's really hot in Jammu, like Kashmiri Muslims go to Jammu in winters when it's very cold in Kashmir. So they could do that, but there has to be a township. There have to be maybe several townships with a lot of security, and I don't think it is an impossible task for them to return once other people also go for businesses and investment in Kashmir.